This case takes place in Wisconsin, USA. Like many of you, I recently finished watching the Jeffrey Dahmer series. If you have, the episode of Tony Hughes is likely one that stood out to you, as the episode is incredibly emotional. However, what is shown in the episode isn't the full truth of what happened, and the relationship between Dahmer and Tony isn't entirely clear. If you haven't seen this series, don't worry, this video will still make sense. Anthony Hughes was a 31-year-old man who lived in Wisconsin. He was born on the 26th of August 1959. Shortly after being born, he was given medication to treat pneumonia. However, the medication caused his hearing to deteriorate and resulted in him becoming deaf. As he grew older, it became apparent he was also mute, and he learned to use sign language to communicate. After graduating from the Wisconsin School for the Deaf, he began to pursue a career in modeling and moved to Madison. His mother Shirley described him as a happy, outgoing individual who enjoyed partying. Other family members stated that he was well liked by those who knew him, and that he could make friends with ease. As Tony couldn't speak, he would always carry around a pen and notepad, and this is what he would use to communicate with people. On the night of the 24th of May 1991, Anthony attended the 219 Club with some friends. The club was a gay club and was one that Dahmer was known to frequent. A friend who was with Tony at the time stated that Tony had walked over to Dahmer and the two began speaking. Tony had with him his pen and notepad, and the two would have a conversation by using this. Dahmer introduced himself as a professional photographer, something that he would sometimes tell his victims. He told Tony that he was very attractive and that he would like him to come back to his apartment so he would be able to take some photographs of him. Dahmer even said that he would pay Tony if he would be willing to leave the club and head back with him right now. Of course, Tony was an aspiring model. The prospect of money and professional photographs being taken was something that greatly appealed to him. Dahmer was able to convince him to head back to his apartment. Once back at the apartment, Dahmer offered him a drink and Tony accepted. Unbeknown to him, it was laced with sleeping pills. After a few moments passed, Tony was rendered unconscious. Dahmer claimed that he didn't just want to keep killing people to only have the photographs and skeletal remains of the victims as a way of keeping them with him. He wanted the victims to stay with him, but not to kill them. So, whilst Tony was unconscious, Dahmer took a drill and drilled a hole into his skull. He then injected acid directly into the cavity he had created. Dahmer would later admit that he had done this in an attempt to make Tony into some kind of submissive zombie, with hopes that he would do whatever he wanted on command. Of course, this disturbing plan of lobotomizing Tony failed, and later that night, he died in Dahmer's apartment. He left Tony on the floor of his bedroom for 3 nights before dismembering his body and submerging his remains in acid, photographing every step of the way on his Polaroid camera. Dahmer had also decapitated Tony and used acid to dissolve the flesh from the bone. Dahmer kept the preserved skull in his apartment, as he had plans of creating an altar where all of the skeletal remains would be displayed. He even drew plans of the altar, which are on screen right now. It was only 2 days later that Dahmer would lure 14-year-old Konerak Sinthasomphone back to his apartment, under the false promise that he would pay him some money for nude photographs. This was done while Tony's body was still in Dahmer's apartment. He lured Konerak inside and rendered him unconscious by giving him a drink laced with sleeping pills. He then drilled a hole into his skull and poured acid into the cavity. This was another attempt to create a submissive zombie. Dahmer later said that after he slipped him the sleeping pills, Konerak was in a semi-conscious state. He guided him to his bedroom, where he walked past the body of Tony laying on the ground, which at this point was beginning to decompose. He said Konerak looked right at the body, but was too dazed by the pills to do anything. Sometime after his head had been drilled, Konerak awoke and was able to escape Dahmer's apartment. He was found outside by some of Jeffrey's neighbours with blood coming from his head. The police were called and arrived on the scene, but Konerak could no longer speak. Dahmer came and told the officers that Konerak was his drunken boyfriend. The officers believed Dahmer and gave Konerak back to him. The officers took a quick look around his apartment but didn't enter the bedroom, where Tony's lifeless body was laid. Once the officers left, Dahmer murdered Konerak. The full story of Konerak, of course, deserves its own video. However, for this one, I wanted to mainly focus on Tony. It was worth mentioning briefly as Konerak saw his body, and due to Konerak, the police nearly found his body, but were too incompetent. On the 22nd of July, Jeffrey Dahmer was caught and arrested. One of his victims was able to escape before being killed. However, after killing Tony and Konerak, Dahmer killed a further 4 people: Matthew Turner, Jeremiah Weinberger, Oliver Lacy, and Joseph Bradehoft. It's believed that Dahmer killed a total of 17 people. A list of all of the victims will be in the description. After Tony was killed, his family had no idea what happened. They searched for him desperately and reported him missing, but when the news broke of the capture of a serial killer, the Hughes family became worried that he was one of the victims. When the police searched Dahmer's apartment, Tony's skull was found. Investigators were able to identify him by using dental records. His family was notified, and their worst fears were confirmed. Now, this is what is slightly strange about the murder of Tony. Exactly how he and Dahmer met isn't exactly clear, and from what I can tell, it's still a little bit murky. But this is what I've been able to find about the relationship between Dahmer and Tony. Once Dahmer was caught, he was questioned about the murder of Tony. Dahmer claimed that he did not know Tony prior to killing him. Although Dahmer was undoubtedly twisted, he was rather cooperative with the police and his lawyers, and gave some detailed accounts of the crimes he committed and his motives. However, according to one of Tony's friends, Michael Scott, Tony had mentioned to him that he had relations with Dahmer, and that he had known him for a number of years. This was also backed up by a couple of other friends too, who claimed to have seen Tony with a man matching Dahmer's description. Tony's mother Shirley also recalled him talking about a friend named Jeffrey. And according to true crime author Brian Masters in his book The Shrine of Jeffrey Dahmer, Dahmer and Tony met in the 219 Club in Milwaukee. And soon after meeting, Tony had asked 3 of his friends to give him a ride to Dahmer's apartment. It's claimed that he and Dahmer sat in the back seat writing notes to one another. Tony wanted to bring the whole company in for drinks at the apartment, but Dahmer indicated that he was inviting Tony by himself. Tony then relayed this information to his friends in sign language, and they understood the situation well enough. He did not at all seem afraid of Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer was sentenced to 941 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Shortly into his sentence on the 28th of November 1994, Dahmer was killed by an inmate named Christopher Scarver. I do have a video on his death, a link to which can be found in the description. The case of Tony is truly horrific, and I thought I'd make a video clearing up some of the confusion surrounding the case, as the Dahmer series did seem to romanticize it a little bit too much. It's worth mentioning that Dahmer did look like a typical 80s/90s guy. It's possible that Tony's friends who think Dahmer and Tony knew each other for some time possibly had him confused with somebody else. Tony's mother, Shirley Hughes, attended the trial of Dahmer. She sat through every single day of the trial, which must have been horrific. The victims' families were able to give impact statements at the trial. Shirley read out the poem written by one of Tony's friends, which goes as follows. Mum, I'm gone. My hope, my breath, my want to live has been taken away from me unwillingly and emotionally. I know that there's a dragon piercing your heart day and night because of this, but yet, I'm not far away. When you get cold, I wrap my arms around you to warm you. If you get sad, I softly grab your heart and cheer you up. If you smile, I'll smile right along with you, and when you're happy, I'll know it's because you're thinking that 2 fingers and 1 thumb means I love you in sign language. When you cry, take 1 teardrop and place it outside your window ledge, and when I pass by, I'll exchange it for 1 of mine, 2 fingers and 1 thumb.